The Wizard of Oz is a story that's filled with memorable characters and locations, so it's no surprise that there's been many adaptations of it, even with the 1939 movie dominating the pop culture consciousness. It's also a story that I'm interested in seeing different interpretations of, so when I saw that there was a JRPG for the DS that was based off of it, I thought it would be worth taking a look at. The story begins with a witch reading from a book, and decides to add our heroine Dorothy and her dog Toto into her story. As you probably expected, Dorothy was living a quiet and peaceful life with her dog in the countryside. No mention of Aunt Em or Uncle Henry though, so I guess they just don't exist in this retelling. Then one day, Dorothy and Toto were swept away by a magical tornado and ended up in the land of Oz. That's when the voice of the Wizard of Oz calls out to her and invites her to his castle. He also gives her a pair of magic shoes so she can travel around Oz. And because this game was licensed by Warner Brothers, Dorothy gets to wear ruby slippers like in the movie, instead of silver ones like in the book. The game has a unique way of moving your character around. On the touchscreen, there's a green trackball that you spin around in order to move. The harder you spin, the faster you'll run, and you can even come to an immediate halt just by quickly stopping the ball. Turning can be a bit tricky while you're running, but the linear paths will keep you from losing track of where you're going. While it is gimmicky, it's at least a gimmick that works well enough for the game it's in. And there's a button that exists simply to allow you to pet your dog, which is always a nice touch. During the first chapter as she travels down the yellow brick road, you'll be meeting Dorothy's traveling companions. But you know how the characters sing a song together when they first meet one another in the movie?
I could while away the hours, conferring with the flowers, consulting with the rain.
Well, in this version, you beat the shit out of each other when you first meet. They don't seem to take it too personally though, and are more than eager to be your friend and join you on your journey when you defeat them. To each their own, I guess. Eventually, the four of them arrive at the wizard's castle, where you meet the Wizard of Oz himself, who looks terrifying. That's when he has a big request for you. There are 4 witches, one for each season, that are threatening to usurp his power. So he asks Dorothy and her friends to steal the magical eggs that are located in the witches' realms, which give the witches their powers, and defeat them. If they can accomplish that, the wizard will grant each of the party members their wishes. And you thought having to kill just one witch was a heavy task. The graphics are very colorful and detailed, which is pretty fitting for a game that takes place in Oz. Granted, the environments are basically just a series of hallways, but at least they're good-looking hallways. Kind of reminds me of Final Fantasy XIII. The character designs are nice, especially for Dorothy and the witches, and both the in-game sprites and artwork depictions are pleasant to look at. I also enjoy the storybook-like illustrations you'll see throughout the story. While the levels aren't very difficult to find your way through, you'll also be doing a lot of backtracking in order to collect treasures and coins. Thankfully, there are signposts you can mark as you go. This also leads to quite a bit of grinding, not just to level up, but new equipment can be quite pricey, and you'll be needing lots of coins. But hey, that's just the JRPG experience. The only equipment you can use for each character are weapons and armor, so there are no items like accessories that could boost your stats, or protect you from status effects. There's also no item or equipment crafting either. These are features that are typically standard in JRPGs, but I would guess that the reason why they aren't in this game is because the developers want to make the experience more accessible and easier for kids. The Wizard of Oz is a children's book after all, so I guess the developers want to cater to a similar age range. Despite that, the combat is still reasonably challenging and requires some strategy. Each character has a particular type of enemy that they're most effective against, and the game will automatically suggest what each character should do. As for the turn-based mechanics, there's a unique ratio system that's used. You have a maximum of 4 ratio points you can use per round, and each party member takes up a certain amount of points. Which means that potentially only 2 characters will be able to perform an action in a round. So you'll have to plan accordingly based off of the type of enemies you're against, and the special abilities of your party members. The enemies themselves are all pretty generic creatures that you'd find in most JRPGs. Which isn't a bad thing in and of itself, but in an Oz-based game, it's a little disappointing. The Oz books are full of interesting lore and characters that would fit right in a video game, like winged monkeys and Kaladas, but there's no sign of them here. The locations in the game are also a bit disappointing. The game is divided into 4 regions that are named after the 4 seasons. In the books, Oz is also divided into 4 main regions, called countries, with their own unique names. It's also surrounded by deadly deserts, which will instantly turn anyone to sand who touches it. And in each of the 4 main countries of Oz, there are many weird and interesting characters, like the China Princess, a living porcelain doll in a land made of fine china, and the hungry tiger, who really wants to eat a fat baby, but also feels immensely guilty about the urge to do so. Sadly, we get none of this in the game, and despite the Oz books having such a detailed fantasy world, the game barely uses any of it. This is a fairly watered-down JRPG experience, which might be a deterrent for some, but it's nonetheless well made in what it does accomplish. It feels like the level designs were built around the trackball mechanic by being intentionally restricting so that you're not constantly finding yourself in the wrong direction. Because trackball movement is not made with making narrow turns in mind, even if you're moving slowly. It feels like it was implemented just to make the most out of the touchscreen. In fact, you only use the touchscreen in this game. While the trackball probably limited the level designs quite a bit, it does at least look like the developers made the most of what they had by making visually appealing environments, and at least you aren't roaming around large levels with a less than ideal movement mechanic. And even with all of the backtracking, the game's length is still pretty short as far as JRPGs go. It would have been nice to see more cutscenes, but the story is still pretty cute too. Really, this isn't a bad game at all. It's just a shame that it didn't take advantage of the rich Oz lore that's available. But in the meantime, I'll be keeping my eyes peeled for an Oz-based game that makes good use of the book's lore. Thanks so much for watching! If you enjoyed the video, be sure to click like, and subscribe if you want to see more.